Hello, everybody, and welcome to another interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill, and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,000 comedians and counting over the last 48 years. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Dr. Oliver Double. Hello, mate.
How are you?
How are you? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yes, thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for doing it. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. You've been teaching and researching comedy and popular performance at the University of Kent since 1999. And before that, you were a stand-up comedian. How did you become a comedian in the first place, please?
Right. First thing I'm going to say is I do tend to go on a bit. So if I end up
That's
going
absolutely fine.
feel free to interrupt at any point. So I was studying drama in the 1980s at university, and I was really interested in comedy. I mean, I had been since I was a little kid. You know, I'd really enjoyed all the usual things, really, for people of my age. I mean, things like Monty Python, The Goodies, Morecambe and Wise, you know, all those kind of things. And I was aware that there was this thing called alternative comedy at the time because I'd watched the young ones. And I also used to watch on TV. They used to occasionally have these sort of charity gigs. So, you know, for Nicaragua or whatever it was. And, you know, I'd seen people like Ben Elton and Andy de la Tour and Rick Mayall doing stand-up on TV. So I was aware that there was this thing that was happening. And when I was in my first year, so it would have been 1983, 84, I went to a thing called the Chaotic Cabaret in one of the student bars. And it was 20p to get in. Anybody could get up and do something. And it was singers and poets and comedians, really, mainly, and sketchers, I suppose, as well. I'll tell you, somebody who was on the bill, that very first one I went to was John O'Farrell, who went on to become a comedy writer and novelist.
These books, brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, so he was doing a skinhead character, a comedy skinhead character, and he was really funny. And I just there was something about that night that I'd never seen a kind of cabaret / variety / live stand-up thing. I'd never seen anything like that live. Obviously, I'd seen things on TV, but I'd never seen it live. And up to that point, I thought, oh, maybe I'll start a band or something and maybe do something with music. But I just looked at it and I just went, this is fantastic. I suppose the closest thing I'd seen to that at that point would have been John Cooper Clarke. I'd seen him where I grew up. And I just thought it was brilliant. And I really wanted to do something. And I just didn't have the guts to get up and do something that night without a plan or any preparation. So next time they did one, which was probably a few weeks later, I went with a plan. I had a little character bit that I'd written, and I did a little two-hander sketch with my friend. And then I also did a third act that second show, which was just completely improv because I loved it. I just loved it. And in fact, you got paid a can of beer to get up and perform.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And I started doing little bits wherever there was a chance to get up and do a bit, I would do a bit. So, you know, the summer ball at the end of my first year, I think I got my first professional gig and I got paid, I think, £20 to get up and do a bit. And I have to say, I was on that occasion at something like 3 a.m.
Wow.
To sleepy drunks. It was really, I think I was doing like maybe half an hour or so, which is way too much for my abilities at that point. And anyway, I just kept doing it through my degree. And when I graduated, I kept doing it wherever there was an opportunity. I was in Exeter, and there wasn't that much. There wasn't a regular comedy night or anything like that. But they would do benefit gigs, and it was always a mixture of acts, and they would be in various different venues. Basically, any time I had to perform, any chance I got to perform, I would do that. And then my old professor said to me, you know, what do you want to do with your life? Because at that point, I was probably on benefits, doing just things like that every now and then. And I went on to do a PhD about stand-up, which was really, he sowed the seeds for that, a guy called Peter Thompson.
Yeah.
And when I then went to to Exeter to start that in from Exeter to Sheffield to start that in 1987. And while I was doing my PhD, I mean, I took it just a step further. So I started a little group of comedians. We used to do regular shows. We took a show to Edinburgh in 89.
Right.
And then we started selling ourselves as a package. We started doing gigs round and about, local pubs, also further afield. We took ourselves wherever we could find somewhere. Found out there were little cabaret nights elsewhere in nearby cities. So we'd go there and do that. And it just grew from there. That's how it started, really.
That's extraordinary. I mean, my first ever gig was aged 7 on a holiday to Scarborough with the family, and we went to see Les Dawson, who was just amazing, incredible. And then the following year, we saw Tommy Cooper, and I got the bug, and I just thought there is something about sitting in an audience and laughing loudly at them. I wasn't aware of the laugh until we saw Tom O'Connor at Torquay, and he walked on, and I burst out laughing at his jokes, and it floored him. He had to leave the stage and then come back on again. I didn't realise he that it was that funny. And everywhere I go, thank God, I should get this laugh insured because they all know who I am. And it's just the most wonderful thing. What's not to love about going to an enclosed environment and making people making you laugh, comedians making you laugh? I've got such an admiration for you to be able to do it. It's just wonderful.
As a punter, I mean, I should probably add that obviously I've seen lots of comedians that I like over the years, and one of them that I'm going to mention now is probably not that fashionable anymore. But the first proper big gig that I saw, big comedy gig, was Ben Elton on his first tour in 1986. And I think somebody might have even bought me a ticket for that. I can't remember, but I remember the gig. And I'd seen him on TV, but I don't think anything had prepared me for how funny he was. Yeah. When he didn't have to worry about saying a rude word and when it was just one big lump of stuff. Yeah. It wasn't just a little 5-minute chunk or something. This was like a 2-hour show. Yeah. And it was incredibly funny and well written. And he was funny as well. I mean, his stupid glittery suit and stuff. Yeah. And I just, it was just, there were so many ideas in there. It was just popping with ideas and words and thoughts and observations. And I get why people kind of turned against him, but but at the same time, I just think that he is a brilliant comedian. He's much more of a material-based comedian. He's not one of those people like Tommy Cooper who could just be funny by being there. But I also think you shouldn't underestimate his skill as a performer. I mean, I've seen him many times live, but one time I saw him and he had flu. And it made it better in a way because his voice was growly and he sounded like he dragged himself from his sick bed. And, the fact that he was so pissed off with things, the fact that he had to in his voice, it kind of made it more exciting in a way.
He is an extraordinary comedian. My home city is Carlisle, but I've lived and worked in London half my life. Yeah. And I went to college in Stoke, and we saw Ben Elton there. And I think it was the same tour because it was 86 to 88. And I saw him in Stoke, and then I saw him about a month or so later in Carlisle. And the thing I found fascinating about him was that depending on his audience, he had different material. So in Stoke, it was all directed towards students. And in Carlisle, it was all directed to Northerners. And he kept looking at his watch and he was timing the laugh. It was an extraordinary thing to watch him do. And then a month or so later, or 6 months or so later, we were very lucky to see Rick Mail in Carlisle, and he was sported by Andy de la Tour. And yet again, the contrast between the two was it was all Patter with Ben Elton, and the visual comedy from Rigmail was extraordinary. And it was one of the greatest nights I've ever seen. Anyway, let's get back to you. Describe your first gig then. So you say it was about 1989 time, somewhere like that?
No, it would have been, my first gig would have been, goodness me, it was probably early 1984. I was still a first year student.
Right.
But I'm going to take you forward actually from there, because I'm going to take you forward to, I guess, maybe early 1986. That's my guess. So what happened was, I'd been doing it for a while, and the first night of the Exeter Arts Centre, I'm not even sure it's a venue anymore. If it's around anymore, it's changed its name. But there was this thing, the Exeter Arts Centre. It opened, I think, in 1986. And I went along to do the first night. They were doing a cabaret, and I'd done a few gigs. I kept doing it as often as I could. And I had two bits of material, was all I had. It was like a silly kind of rap and a silly song. Ridiculous. I couldn't play very well. I couldn't do that very well. But what I remember was that I had this pair of massive boxer shorts that somebody had given me. And I thought it'd be quite funny to come out with a Boy Scout scarf around my neck, these big boxer shorts, army boots, and then a friend just before I went on lent me some Ray-Ban sunglasses.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, well, I'm just going to walk out, because it's a funny way to dress to go on stage. So I'll go out and I'll do that. And what happened was I walked on, and that was like a real big moment for me, because what happened was I walked on, there was this enormous, like stupidly big laugh. And I think everybody else who'd been on so far in the cabaret had been doing quite carefully constructed things, like a sketch or a character monologue or something like that. And I just played with the reaction that I got with the audience. I just played with it. I just improv loads of stuff, and people just went mad for it. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. I did the things I prepared as well.
Yeah.
But they were like a side note to the main thing that happened, which was that I clicked with an audience in a way that I hadn't before. It's not that I hadn't got anything from an audience before, but I'd never had that kind of visceral response. And then what happened was, for the next year, maybe, I was trying to get that back. And I was sometimes getting it back and sometimes not. And I think that's quite a typical pattern, really, that at first you have maybe one early gig which really hits, and then it's like, okay, how do I get it to be like that?
Yeah.
And it was just an amazing moment. I'll never forget it. I've got photographs of that night, sadly not a recording. I wish I had a recording of it.
So would you say that was the point where you thought, yes, I can do this for a living for a while? Or was there ever a point in your comedy career where that happened?
Probably that moment, actually.
Yeah. Because that's fascinating. I do ask a lot of comedians, was there a moment? And a lot of them do say yes, because it's like, you can do this. And I say to them, it must all be about experience. You must have to experience a difficult gig to become a better comedian and this sort of thing. Yeah.
Definitely.
Was there a pattern that you had when you were on stage? What did you like to talk about? Were there any specific themes or anything, or was it just of the time?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I still perform a little bit. I compare a monthly club at the local theatre, and I do material for that every show.
Yeah.
And I think as a much older person, I think I talk about things that in some ways are very different and in other ways are really similar. So I've always been quite interested in politics. I've always been quite interested in pop culture. And I suppose I've also always been interested in, I quite like bawdy humour, like rude stuff, like little, the childish glee of sex, toilets and swearing, basically. And,
we've never met, and I'm so glad we have.
Yeah. So I think that's the kind of thing. I mean, I did an early piece that I did, which was based on it was originally a sketch that I did with a couple of friends, and then I adapted it into a solo bit. But there was a bit where, well, it changed quite a lot actually when I sort of made it my own bit. But it was called Scooby-Doo Meets the Sandinistas, and it was a whole bit about Scooby-Doo. I played all the characters, but also it was about the socialist government in Nicaragua. And that's like peak me, really. You know, you've got a cartoon and you've got sort of politics, and I still think I think the way I approach it's probably different, but those are things that I'm interested in. You know, like, I don't know, the minutiae of pop culture and music and stuff, but also, you know, like politics and rudeness. That is probably it. I could probably got something better.
It's so good, as I say, because my dad, God bless his soul, his legacy, he was a union man and he became president of NALGO in the 80s. And he formed Unison, which is now the union. And it's like, good God, this is extraordinary. Everybody uses it a lot. You know, he was 1/3 of an amalgamation.
Amazing.
And I can remember, so that's the politics bit. And I can remember I would be 10 and my brother was 16 when punk hit. And we always used to listen to John Peel, and I'd look in awe. And my brother makes adverts, and he was drawing on the dining room table at the Art A level, and I was listening to all these incredible bands. And I caught the tail end of it with Scar and The Jam and Madness and all that. And I love my music as well. So, I feel as though we've known each other for years.
Well, no, it's classic. I mean, punk was a really big influence. And I still, you know, I mean, one of the things I do in my comparing now is I've settled into a pattern where, I mean, the club is monthly, so I've got time to work on things.
Yeah.
So I settled into a pattern where I typically do 2 songs, like one which is a bit longer and a bit more thought out, and one which is a super topical, very short song. And they're pretty much all punk, all being played on the mandolin, you know. So
well, it changed everything.
Yeah. It's such a good medium because it was about simplicity and getting to the point quickly, and also use what have you got at your disposal that you can use. Great, use that, throw that at it. So that's kind of how I approach the whole business of what I'm going to say on stage, really.
That's wonderful. And moving on from that, do you have a specific writing process when you go on stage? Do you write notes? Do you remember in your head? How do you approach doing it?
I think it differs, really. I mean, when I was doing when I was doing comedy for my living, I did a weekly comparing spot, and for that, what I would do is through the week, for most of the week was panic. What am I going to say on stage next week? And then what I would do is every time I'd read the paper every day, trying to look for ideas from that. It was a renewable source of potential material. And then I would sort of write down, if I had a half thought about something that could be funny, I would sort of write that down on a piece of paper. Come Thursday, I would look at what I had on my paper. Hopefully there was 5 or 6 things. And I would sort of stand in a room and talk through how I was going to do that on stage. And so the process of writing was really talking it through. So that was also the process of learning it. It was the worst bit of the week for me because talking to yourself in a room, it makes you feel A, unhinged, and B, unfunny. And because you I mean, unless you're a huge egotist, you're not imagining gales of laughter. You're just hearing the silence that surrounds you in the room as you're saying these things. That was how I did it then. Now I would differ, really. I mean, for the monthly comparing, I don't write a lot down. I'll probably jot down an idea so I don't forget it.
Yeah.
But I'm ticking away thinking about it as I walk around or have a shower in the morning or whatever it is. With the songs that I do, I have to actually practice those. So that I work quite hard at that. I think one of the reasons I do songs is because it's easier to it's less sad practicing songs than practicing stand-up.
Right.
But then the other thing I do, sometimes I'll do a longer show. I've done a couple of longer shows. With that, it's really just writing down the ideas so I don't forget them. And then, I don't like, it's the same sort of thing as I used to do, really. I don't like practicing them aloud, but it's the only way I've got of getting them in my head. I don't have a big enough audience to do warm-up gigs.
Yeah.
Well, I've got the audience who will come to see the show, and that's it. So it's one shot at this. So I have to really get it into my head well enough so that I can play in the moment as well and not worry about losing my place. But what I'm not is the sort of person who writes it down word for word and then learns it. I can't do that. That kills it for me. It has to be a thing of kind of getting, and then sometimes what you do is you've practiced it one way, but when you get in front of an audience, you just having people in front of you, you suddenly realize, oh no, it's better if I say it like this.
Yeah, yeah.
So it doesn't matter how much you've practiced it to get into your head, you've got to kind of hold open the possibility, because it's a bit like talking to a real person rather than, it's a little bit of an old reference this, because people don't tend to leave voicemails as much, but you know, when you leave a voicemail, it's awful because you know there's nobody listening. So practicing stand-up is a bit like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to focus, whereas like this is quite easy because I'm looking at your face and I'm reading all the non-verbal visual cues. And it's the same with an audience. You're looking at them and you're listening to them and you have a sense of what's going on there. And sometimes you just, in the moment, you kind of go, oh, wait, that's the word I should say now.
It's funny because you mentioned the songs with the guitar. Two comedians instantly come to mind. One is Boothby Graffoe, who I've loved for years. And the other one's Mervyn Stutter. Every year we go and see him. And there's always a song at the start of the showcase. And it's such a good way of kicking off a show. So, you know, if you've got a song at the top and a song in the middle at the bottom or whatever, it breaks it down into chunks, and and the audience are listening all the time, and you've got them with the song and everything. It's a wonderful idea.
Historically, there's a good reason why comedians used to, but you know, back in the sort of pre-alternative days, why they used to finish with a song. So there's a couple of reasons. One is that stand-up, certainly in the way it evolved in the UK, was that its main sort of source of its evolution was music hall, which was primarily a comic song-based form, right? So there was that. So it's partly that. And then another reason is because in the variety theatre days, I mean, different comedians would do different numbers of songs, but you'd always finish with a song. And here's why. Because when you were starting out, or possibly when you were on the way back down, you'd be the second spot comic.
Yeah.
So how it would work is they play the overture, and then they would do, that's just the theatre orchestra playing a tune, and then you would have the first act, which is typically a couple of dancers. So they would do a short tap routine or whatever, and then you'd come on, you'd be the second spot comic. The audience is not that worked up. They don't have a compare. It's just numbers at the side of the stage. So there's no compare taking the edge off the audience. So you're going onto a comparatively cold audience. Also, the way that audiences behaved in those days was different from today. Today, audience expects to applaud the act onto the stage. You know, if that didn't happen today, that would be something you could joke about as the comedian. That's happened to me before. You make a joke at the fact the audience didn't applaud you on. But actually, in that day and age, mid-20th century, it wasn't the norm unless you were famous to applaud the act onto the stage.
Yeah, yeah.
But also, if they didn't like you, they might not even applaud at the end. So you'd be walking off to the sound of your own feet, which is grim. Whereas if you finish with a song, it's kind of hard for them not to applaud. So they're going to, even if they hate you, they're likely to applaud again, which gives you a chance to get off stage with dignity.
That is fascinating. That's a fascinating answer. It reminds me of the Ken Dodd line where he's describing laughter. I've seen Ken Dodd many times. He's describing laughter, and it's saying it comes up into your body, and then it comes out, and he goes into an elongated routine about it. And he goes, Freud said that laughter was X, Y, and Z, and blah blah blah. And then at the end of it, he said, mind you, Freud didn't play Glasgow Empire on a Friday night.
Right, and that's a really specific reference, because Dodd started in Variety. I mean, he started in the latter days of Variety, but I mean, the Glasgow Empire was, I've interviewed people who played it, and the thing they particularly didn't like was English comedians.
Yeah.
Because it was a sort of tribal thing, really, of, you know, we're proud of our city, and you know, I mean, there's still a bit of that in Scotland now.
Yeah.
And it was particularly Friday night, because that's the end of the working week for a lot of people, and I think particularly Second House, because they've had a few by that point. And one of the things they would do is throw the screw.
You can't imagine.
Throw the beer bottle tops at the person, you know, on the stage, and yeah, I mean, it was a rite of passage, really. I mean, they might, you know, the rest of the week, 12 shows a week in Variety, typically 2 shows a night, Monday till Saturday. And so you might have had a decent time up to that point, but that Friday night is where you've got to. And then apparently it could also be a problem on the Saturday if there was a England v Scotland match, for example.
Of course.
Particularly if England won, then that's
that was it. That was it. I had a go at stand-up comedy once in my illustrious career. I've told a lot of comedians this. It was a gong show, and it was I knew the promoter who was doing it, and he said, "Yeah, have a go." I said, "Well, I can remember routines and jokes and things from the comedians I've seen." And he said, "Well, yeah, it's a gong show. It's an old folks gong show, and it couldn't be worse." And he said, "You've got 3 minutes. You walk on, and if you're not very good, they gong you off." So I wrote this script about being accident prone in a car in Carlisle, and I thought it was quite good, and he loved it. So I walked out, and there's 3 people in the audience, and the first thing I said was, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. People think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the ski jumper, but I can't see the resemblance myself." Now, when I was at college, they used to stop lectures because I was his double his brother, but there was not one word. This old bloke just went, "Fuck off." And I said to the promoter, I said, "I don't know whether I could do this as a full-time job. Never say never, but certainly in the audience, that's where I should be." And that's what happened. But it's an extraordinary thing if you can do stand up well. Even if you can't do stand up well, it's just getting up and having a go. Because I would have regretted it if I never had a go. And who knows, what's going to happen. Tell me more about your comedy club, because when I researched you, it said it's Sheffield's longest running comedy club.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah,
Last Laugh.
So I was part of the team that ran the Last Laugh from its inception in 1992, 30 years ago, till 1997, and then that's when I moved from Sheffield to Liverpool. That's why I stopped being involved. And then even then, I would occasionally go back for the next couple of years. So I think the last time I appeared there was maybe 99.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was, so I had been to do some gigs in Birmingham, and that's where Frank Skinner really kind of cut his teeth. And he would do comparing at the 4X. There were 2 4X comedy clubs. There was one in Bearwood in Birmingham. There was one somewhere else, I can't remember now. And then they also had 2 more gigs, one in Bristol and one in Cheltenham. And so you could go and do 4-night run for them. It was great. But the thing that really impressed me, and I'd seen Eddie Izzard doing the Screaming Blue Murder gigs in London as well. And Eddie was brilliant, just a phenomenal comedian.
He's extraordinary. Yeah.
Extraordinary. And the kind of the surrealism, the silliness, at that point still genuinely improvisational nature of it. And Frank Skinner was probably slightly less to my taste in that, it's much more of a kind of ladsy humour, but he was brilliant. I mean, he was just, the thing is, you could look at it and go, he's just crude, but I think you'd be missing something. It was the delicacy and the skill with which he could explore very, very rude sexual situations. But the thing that really got me about Frank Skinner was that he was. I saw him. I did at least one where I did that run of 4 gigs. So I did the Cheltenham, Bristol, the 2 Birmingham, Bearwood, and what I can't remember, Kings Heath maybe the other one, and what impressed me was that the 2 Birmingham ones he did the same set. And he did maybe 40 minutes of material over the course of the night, and it was all gold, like really funny. But also the same week he'd done different stuff at Cheltenham and Bristol because he was just writing the whole time. And I just went, this is brilliant. That's clearly the thing to do, is to get a comparing gig, have to compare every week, and then I was a bit stuck in my same sort of 20-minute set, and I wanted to get out of that. Anyway, so I talked to one of the people who was part of the group that was with, Roger Monkhouse. And then we spoke to some people who were running comedy in Sheffield at the time at Sheffield City Memorial Hall, which I think is now where the Last Laugh's main gig is.
Mm-hmm.
And they were running a thing called Fool's Paradise. And so we got together with them, and we actually around the same time, they'd done a run of gigs in Sheffield pubs with Tony Allen, one of the original comedians. And I'd seen one of those, and it was absolutely brilliant. So there was obviously something in the air, but there hadn't been at that point, there hadn't been a weekly pub-based comedy club in Sheffield, not to my knowledge. There'd been things, lots of things had happened, like there'd been a Linda Smith and Warren Lakin had done a thing, a sort of new variety night, and people had done different things. But that kind of weekly club, getting acts from around the country, mainly London, but also Birmingham, Newcastle, Bristol, round and about, Manchester particularly, nobody had done that. And so we got together with Simon and Charlie from Fool's Paradise, and we ran a season of, a weekly club for maybe 13 weeks. And then what happened was we had a bit of a fallout with them, and I stayed on as compere. Roger was out of it for a bit. Then Simon it was all complicated. Simon pulled out, but Charlie wasn't working for Simon anymore. So Charlie came in with us. Anyway, It went on for a bit, and eventually ended up just being me and Roger. So Roger would program it, I would be the weekly compere. And then we got a second venue. So Roger would compare that one, I would compare this one. And what we would do was we were able to get two acts from wherever much more cheaply to do two shows in one night than we could if it was two shows over two nights. So we would get one to open at one show and then close at the other, and then we would have people to drive them between and then swapping over. So I would have one opening, and then the other one would then come to close at the Lescar in Bar, Sheffield. And I can't say that I was brilliant as a compere straight away. First night went really well, and then the second week is where it starts to bite, because you realise you've got to come up with something every week. But although I can't pretend to be anything on the same universe of talent as Eddie Izzard and Frank Skinner, what it did do was meant I always had some topical material, because you just had to kind of get material every week. You had to get stuff to say on stage. And we ran it for 5 years. We had some really brilliant acts who went on to become really famous. I mean, who did we have? We had Graham Norton and Milton Jones and Dylan Moran and loads of brilliant people. And some people who didn't go on to become famous, but also brilliant. Bob Dillinger, Rory Motion. And it was just really great. And then what eventually ended up in the hands of Toby Foster, who I think done his first open spot for us. And it's still, as far as I'm aware, still runs today. It must be 30 this year. So,
well, congratulations. That's fantastic. What a legacy that is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super happy, because it was a really important time for me. And I'm really happy that it's still going. And Sheffield's a brilliant city. It was just a really, really lovely thing to be involved in.
That's brilliant. I go to a regular comedy club every week. I go to Always Be Comedy at Kennington, and I was looking for a venue that reminded me of the Edinburgh Fringe, just a room, and there's loads of pubs and everything. And when I first went, this would be 5 years ago, it was Josh Widdicombe was the headline act, who I absolutely love. And I was sitting about halfway back, and he collared me that night on my laugh. And I thought, well, I don't really think I'm that loud. Then they got me to sit on the front row, and I've been sitting there ever since. And my confidence has gone through the roof, because all the comedians that they get on feature me in the acts because of the laugh and all the rest of it. And I get up and I do a song, and of course the joke is I can't sing a note, and it's just wonderful. And it's like part of the family. And James Gill, who we are not related, I wish we were, because my name's Richard Gill. He's so good at getting everybody together and warming them up. And do you think that comparing is a do you prefer comparing to stand-up routines, or do you think they're two different things?
I mean, they cross over massively. What I enjoy about comparing is no expectation.
Yeah,
they're just delighted if you're funny. I think as well, how I approach it is, I know, like, I don't do it, I don't think, in a very conventional way. I'm always trying to think of things to do with an audience so it doesn't feel like it's material that I've gone away and written. So I always try and think of like weird audience participation bits or things like that. So I do a thing, I've never been able to do crowd work. I just don't have the mind or the memory for it. I can't, people tell me their name and I won't remember that name. I mean, that's one of the things about it. You've got to be able to remember who you talk to. And also when people say, I mean, the typical things people talk to when they're doing crowd work is, what do you do for a living? Are you two together? And I'm not that interested in those topics. So, so I have a thing called stupid questions where the audience have to volunteer for it. I don't pick people out. And I've written something like 130 questions in a book, and then they have to give a number, and then I go through, and the questions might be, I'll give you an example of one that I've written recently. It's, if you bought a book called Cooking with Jamie, and instead of being recipes written by the TV chef Jamie Oliver, it was recipes of how to prepare the carcass of TV chef Jamie Oliver for the table, would you be disappointed or delighted? So that's the question, right?
That's brilliant.
Hopefully the question itself is quite funny, but then sometimes people's answers to those questions, often those answers are really funny, and especially if they're then that's the kind of thing I like to do. And what you're really trying to do, is you're trying to change the audience from a room full of people to an audience that has kind of an interest in the show, and it believes that this is going to be a funny show, and that are willing to join in and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's quite an important role, and I try and do it in a slightly unconventional way.
Well, I think that idea is brilliant, and I would love to come to Sheffield when you're comparing and see you do it.
That's in Canterbury now, because I'm based.
Oh, in Canterbury, right? Okay.
So,
I'll find out there. Yeah. Definitely. Let's move on. I've been very lucky for the last 15, 16 years to go to Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Fringe, and that's my holiday. I go there for a week. I see 50 shows. A lot of friends of mine come up, and we just have the best time. I do one of my infamous spreadsheets, planning everything. What was your first Edinburgh Fringe like? What year did you first go up? When did you first perform there?
Right. I surprisingly, I haven't been that many times to the Fringe, and I've only been up to actually perform as an actual stand-up once.
Right.
And it's because I didn't either have the money or the time is the key thing. And like money is like, I mean, I never really had an agent, so I never had somebody to take me up. So it's always a big financial risk.
Yeah.
Since I've been doing other work, like working in university, I've had the money, but then, have you got the time? So I've been upset, a number of times over the years, but the first one I went to was also the first one I performed at, or the only one I performed as such, which was the Edinburgh Fringe 1989.
Right.
And it was a really interesting experience. We managed to get accommodation with a student company that was booking a place, and I think we rented rooms off them in a sort of shared house. I think there were 5 of us, sharing a room, so 4 acts, and then we had a front of house person who did all the tech and everything. We were on at the Masonic Lodge, I think it was.
Yeah.
Venue 33, I think memory serves. Our show was called Comedy Abattoir. We were called Red Grape Cabaret. The poster was we had this cartoon grape with the face and legs and arms, and he was, or they, I suppose, the gender non-specific grape, was in a spotlight with a microphone stand, and then had a kind of Freddy Krueger claw in the cartoon. And we were lucky enough to go from nobody had heard of us to we were very lucky with our reviews. So we had we got, I think we got listed as pick of the day in the Independent, and we got in the Scotsman, and we got in some of those ones, you know, those Review 89, those kind of ones. And so we went from a very, you know, kind of, you know, mixed audience, some days 2 people, some days 20, to selling out by the end. And we also had really nice that there was a show went up called, oh God, I'm not remember the name of it now, but Ivor Dembina had taken it up. Comic Abuse, I think it was called.
Yes, yeah, it was something like that. Yeah,
something like that. Maybe I've got mixed up with somebody else, but anyway, it was Ivor Dembina, and it was him, Jim Tavaret, Patrick Marber, who went on to become a very well-known playwright.
Wow.
And Jack Dee. That was the lineup. Wow. And it was anyway, they came to see our show and they invited us to theirs, which was really, really good. And we went to watch, you know, a number of different things. We went to watch one with Joe Brandon, and went to see some theatre things, you know, and it, you know, a lot of staying up late, a lot of getting drunk, a lot of eating chips with salt and sauce, you know, a lot of hiring. I remember being near Steve Coogan, and Mike Haley had a show called Seaside Special, and I remember seeing in deck chairs with, you know, the knotted hankies on their head, giving out flyers very close to us. I tell you, I remember playing the Fringe Club, and it was very heckly, and I had a bit of heckling at the beginning, and I managed to say some things off the top of my head and win the audience over and kind of storm it a little bit. But I remember seeing the Doug Anthony All-Stars, the Australian group, and they were just brilliant at the Fringe Club. And I remember them talking to me and being quite nice about they'd seen me do that and being, that was great, mate. You know, that's kind of thing.
That's fantastic, because there's so many wonderful, unforgettable memories that it gives you, and you think, this is extraordinary. For a month in August, you're at the biggest arts festival in the world, and it's not just comedy, it's theatre, it's music, it's film, and everything just combines. It's just an extraordinary thing. I saw you in 2015 on your show Talking Comedy at the Fringe. And the 2 that I saw, which were fascinating, were Alexei Sayle and Joe Brand. And I think it was the 30th year of the Gilded Balloon. How did you find that? Because you were interviewing them. Well, presumably they were a joy to listen to, like this is now.
Yeah, well, I'd done a number of things over the years where I'd sort of interviewed comedians on stage through. Yeah. I don't really know how it started, but I can't even remember what my first one. But you know, I'd done these events where I'd talked to people like Joe Brand, Ross Noble, Alexei Sayle, and this had become a thing that I'd sort of learned how to do. And then my friend Warren Lakin, who was Linda Smith's partner, and ran. Yeah, I mean, Warren's absolutely diamond geezer, super lovely guy, and obviously Linda was lovely and a brilliant comedian. And Warren just said, "Oh, we want to do this thing, Talking Comedy." It was at the Assembly Rooms. I think we were 2 different venues.
That's right. Yeah.
And he already had some people lined up, but he said, "Who would you like to get?" And so we talked about ideas. And one of the things I wanted to get was I wanted to make sure that there was an equal blend of men and women. And then I also wanted other forms of diversity. So we had some sort of, it wasn't all white acts, and we had, people who were LGBTQ plus. And we also had Nina Conti, who's not obviously a stand-up as such. And I was so pleased that all of that Warren sorted it so well. And it was a mixture as well of people that I'd met before and people, in some cases, that I'd spoken to before and sort of interviewed before, either on stage or just interviewed for research. And then people I'd never met before at all, but I was just a fan of.
Yeah.
And it was just brilliant. We did 6 shows in 6 days, some in a smaller venue and some in the big venue.
Yeah.
And every one of them, I just loved it. It was just a joy. And I'll tell you a memory actually. I interviewed Susan Calman, who I've met a few times, and I think she's a lovely person and a brilliant comedian.
Yeah.
But she is considerably shorter than me. I'm quite a tall man. And I'm quite interested in the particular thing that the body that the comedian inhabits and how they make use of it, the face, the stance, the voice, the thing that makes you, I think, fundamentally part of why you relate to a comedian, why you relate to this one and maybe don't relate to that one. I think it's tied up in the person they are, and that starts with the physical being that they are. So I often ask comedians about that, and then I go out from that. How do you choose to wear why do you wear what you wear on stage? And comedians are surprisingly thought out about that. Like, for example, a number of comedians have talked to me just about the shoes they choose to wear. But anyway, I was talking to Susan Calman about this, and two things. One is that she started gently ribbing me for it. The fact that I, as a much taller person, was asking about this. Why are you obsessed with this? But then the other thing was, we were on chairs that were quite tall chairs, and she started doing that with her legs, making her legs go back and forth. And she was just so playful, and I mean, she's brilliant.
She is brilliant. Yeah,
she's brilliantly kind of intelligent and thought out, but at the same time, there's a sort of silliness there that I really relate to.
It's so endearing.
Really endearing,
yeah.
And then the other one, I mean, every single one I enjoyed, but another one that really sticks out was Nina Conti. I mean, I hadn't met her before, and she said, "I brought Monkey with me, but don't get me to get him out too early, or we won't get a word in edgeways," right? Which I thought was brilliant. And one of the things I said to her was, I asked her about the thing about splitting, because one of the things I think is brilliant about Nina Conti, I think lots of things are brilliant, but I think the thing that I think is amazing is how not only is Monkey a brilliant character and the other characters she does, but also she as a Vent, when she's playing particularly opposite Monkey, like her character is brilliantly contrasting with Monkey, so she does the embarrassed laughter so convincingly. She said that outrageous thing that she's now embarrassed about in The Guy's a Monkey. And so I was asking her about that, and I was asking her about, that if Monkey was real. And she said, well, in a way, Monkey is real. And it was a brilliant idea for me, I thought. She said, in a way, he's real in the sense that Bart Simpson is real, in that it's a character that we all understand. It's not a real person that thinks, but it's a real person that we all can, if we've heard of that person, that we all know how that character works. And in our collective imagination, that character is as real as anything.
Right? She is extraordinary, because I always remember the sketch where she adopts Monkey's voice and Monkey adopts her voice, and Monkey is in total control of that sketch, and it's extraordinary. And you think, this thing's alive. And when you said Bart Simpson, it was amazing, because that's one of the things. Yeah, she must have been fascinating to talk to.
She was amazing, a genuinely interesting person. And I think one of the things I love about talking to and knowing comedians is that they tend to, I think people can romanticize this a bit, but actually over a long period, I've thought about it a lot, and I think it's true. I think comedians are different from most people in that. It's not that nobody else is like this, but I think that they've often got a slightly eccentric or outsider point of view. So I think probably the comedian that I know the best is probably Mark Thomas. I mean, we're pretty, I hope you won't mind me saying this, but we're pretty good friends. I really, really love Mark, and he's
a lovely bloke. Yeah,
really super lovely guy. And I think without a kind of single-mindedness and a kind of slight difference in the way that he sees the world, I just don't think that he could be that comedian that he is.
I totally agree. Absolutely. Yeah. The thing I find fascinating, and I've now interviewed over 100 of the comedians, is I start off, I've never done any interviewing before or any chatting before online or anything. But what I find is I have a sketch outline of what I'm going to ask the comedians. You do your research and everything, but every one of them's got a different story, even although you're sticking to the same sort of script. And I find that fascinating. I don't know what it is, because you're there in the audience watching them on stage, and then afterwards they're like going, "Oh, was I really that good?" And the confidence suddenly drops. You say, "Yeah, that was amazing," you know. And so one of the reasons why I think my blog works, it's not just famous comedians; it's like supporting everybody who's willing to get up and have a go. And it's a wonderful thing that you've done. I think it's fantastic. Let's move on to your teaching itself. So, how did you get into teaching comedy performance? And tell me more about the course that you teach.
Well, I think I'd started doing workshops before I worked in universities, and this came about through various reasons. Sometimes people would just ask me to do something, and occasionally I would get a university paid me some money to come and do some workshops with their students. And then I got a job in 1997. What happened was, through various family circumstances, which I probably won't go into right now, it became important for me to be earning a bit more of a reliable wage, and probably slightly more than I was making from comedy at the time. But it was more the reliable thing. Around the time we started having kids, I mean, it was all tied up with that, to put it simply. And so I thought, well, I need a proper job, as it were, and I need that. And I thought, what can I do? And I thought, well, okay, I've got a PhD, I've got this industrial experience, as it were. I've been a comedian, and I've got some experience of working in universities, and I've written a book. So that probably seems like maybe, you know, working in universities. Find a drama course, see if I can get a job. And I got a job working initially at John Moores in Liverpool, which I did for a couple of years. And at first I was just teaching just regular drama stuff. So, you know, an improvisation course or something like that. And then it would have been in my first year, but my second term of teaching, they said, look, we have this thing called specialist workshop, where anybody who's working here who has a specialism can teach their specialism, and students sort of opt for it within that module. Would you like to do something on stand-up? And I said, yeah, all right. And I had to think about how to make that work. And it was a bit of a pressure gig, because Granada TV came to film that first series of workshops because they were making a little docu-soap bit for just a local program. Right. And they made a little docu-soap out of it. And the woman who was directing it was super nice, and it made it not as dramatic as it could have been. But it was a bit of a pressure gig, learning how to teach it in a more thoroughgoing way than I'd done before. Anyway, I did that for a couple of years, and then I came to Kent in '99, and they basically allowed me to expand what I did. At one point, I had this year-long thing where we had this 4-year degree, and students could specialise in stand-up for a whole year, and I got them doing a weekly show. I did that for 15 years, actually. It was a big thing. And quite a few people who I taught went on to work in comedy in one way or another. And then I also started teaching other things to do with my research. So I wrote a module called Popular Performance, where they could do a project about variety or music hall, or one I've taught most recently in that is about alternative cabaret of the 80s, which is now history. And so students learn about Alexei Sayle and Pauline Melville and Benjamin Zephaniah. And then they write their own acts in that same sort of, you know, in that same vein, really. And really what you're trying to do is to, within the course of a series of workshops, to get them ready to be in front of an audience, and not just like if they were doing a play, to do a fixed thing. But it can be a fixed thing, but they have to always be able to come off script if necessary and deal with something new. So how I base it is I have exercises, but actually a lot of it is just getting them to write something every week, try it out, bit of feedback, record themselves, and then build their act. That is basically the principle. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's at the core of it.
You must get a lot out of teaching them, because watching them develop, it's another reason why I do the blog. Watching the comedians develop from young comedians to big stars is amazing, because you keep, it's all about experience. I keep going back to the word experience, and it's the same there. I've been many a friend's 5-minute a comedy night friend in a pub who goes along and supports them all, and they're so grateful that somebody is there that they know, and it must be wonderful to adapt it. I think it's a great thing that you've done, moving from stand-up into teaching, because one of the things, certainly for me sitting in an audience, is it gave me confidence. And of course, they have to stand up and present, and there's all sorts of different avenues to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things is, if you teach something, I mean, people would say, I think the argument against teaching comedy is it can make everybody come out the same. But I really try and focus on the individuality of the student. What is their worldview? What is the way they talk? What are their experiences? How is their sense of humor? And I really try and focus it on that. And then the other thing is, you learn so much about comedy. I think I know way more about comedy now than I did when I was doing it as for my living, because you step back from it and you see how it works. When you see different people doing it, you can sort of work out how it works, and you can start to give feedback which really helps them get to where they want to get to. And yeah, it's brilliant. And then, like you say, a huge part of it, I think this is not understood enough. Talent is really important, right? But I think as important, if not more important, is attitude. Because actually, I think there are 3 things that go to being able to make a living from comedy as a comedian. 1 is talent. 2 is persistence and attitude. And 3 is luck. Now, you can't do anything about luck, but you can do a hell of a lot about the other 2. Talent is constantly work to improve your material and your performance. So really work at it. Pay attention, record yourself, listen to it back, work out how it could go better, how you could change that bit, make it better. Persistent. Don't be put off by an audience that doesn't like what you do. Listen back to the recording, work out why it went wrong. What could you have done differently? And actually, if you work on the talent, you work on your persistence, then the luck takes care of itself. Eventually, you'll get in front of somebody. So somebody like Laura Lex, who I taught as an undergrad, Laura was always great, always a super clever, super creative person who took risks and everything like that, took creative risks. But the other thing about Laura that was amazing was she was like a terrier. Even then, she would not be put off. She would keep putting herself out there. So determined. And she went from being somebody who was great, but it was a bit all over the place, in the sense of she was constantly trying different things. To being somebody who felt supernatural on stage, really easy, really good, really skilled at playing the moment, really clever material, and just a great comedian. And I think, she could have experienced more luck. I think she hasn't been the luckiest person, but it's really started to happen for her now. She's started to be on Mock the Week more, which is a big kind of gateway thing for comedians. And actually, one of the things that really helped her was that she was just tweeting during lockdown about imagining that Jurgen Klopp was her husband, and he was this sort of, she was attracted by sensibleness in the face of government idiocy, right? And this became a viral set of tweets, which then became a book deal, which then, she's had 2 books out of it now. Those things can happen because, just because you've done the other things, you've worked at your talent, you've constantly put yourself out there, eventually you'll find your way in front of the right people.
It's so interesting listening to you, because I suppose obviously a graduate is another way of getting into the stand-up comedy world, whereas with me, as I said before, I would go along and I would watch these comedians do their first ever gig, and they're now on to 4,000 or 5,000 or whatever it is. And you're so right about luck. It must be very, very rewarding for you to see your results.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, some of the people that I've taught would include Laura, obviously, the Noise Next Door, that comedy improv group.
They're on this next week.
Oh, there we go. Well, say hello to them.
Say hello.
And Tom Horton,
brilliant.
Jimmy McGee, Tin and Dewey, you know, quite a few, and some people who've sort of graduated more recently, and you know, I love it. I mean, it's so. I'll tell you, there was a group that they're not together anymore, but they're all performing individually still. In fact, one of them's in Noise Next Door now. But there was a group that came out of Kent a few years ago called the Three Half Pints, and it was
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Okay, so it was Robin from the Noise who went on to become part of Noise Next Door.
Yeah.
Rich Franks, who's in the Panto at the Horth in Crawley every year and does other Crawley rather, does other things, and then a guy called Callum. I was just trying to remember his surname. It's Donnelly, but I can't remember whether he's got a stage name or not. Anyway, they did this sort of retro slapstick trio, and they were so funny. And they were already, by the time they graduated, I think they'd been to the Free Fringe at least once, possibly twice. And I saw them do loads of different gigs. I saw them do stand-up clubs. I saw them do family events. I saw them do open air. And I saw them very rarely anything less than brilliant because they were so funny. And it was really weird seeing people doing stuff so based on things like Laurel and Hardy and the Three Stooges and so on. And they were really good at the physical stuff, but they all had really funny personas. And then they eventually kind of went on and before they split up, they did some stuff for CBeebies. They were on Justin's House a couple of times, I think. And I loved going to see them every time. I was really sad when they split up, and I'm so happy that even though they went their separate ways, they're all doing their own thing.
They're all still fine, yeah.
Yeah, every time. I mean, I went just before the first lockdown, I think it was. I went to see Rich's one-man show at the Horth, and it was just brilliant. I love going to see them. And
That's
during lockdown, I remember seeing Laura's tour show, and so unfortunately it was only over Zoom, but still it was brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, so
seeing her any time, she is great. Yeah. That's wonderful. You also established the British Stand-Up Comedy Archive, which is based at Kent's Templeman Library, and you also have a podcast, A History of Comedy in Several Objects, based on the archive. How did the archive come about? Because I've got Tommy Cooper Fair's loads of books behind me. I love reading biographies, and it's fascinating. I would love to come and see it one day.
You'd be very, very welcome.
Thank you very much.
So how it came about is a very precise set of circumstances. We because I used to know Warren Lakin and Linda Smith back in the day. Warren was moving house, and he had Linda's entire personal archive, including things like books she'd won at school as a school prize, and diaries and set lists and off-air recordings, and privately made recordings of her performances from over the years, and photos and posters and loads, ridiculous amount of stuff. He was moving house, and he didn't have space for it anymore. He said he thought of various places it could go to. He thought it could go to Kent, where Linda grew up, or it could go to Sheffield, where they were based for many years. But because I was based at Kent, Warren reached out to me and said, look, we've got this stuff. What do you think? And I thought, yes, brilliant. But I had to contact our special collections and archives department to make sure that it was okay. And the person who was in charge of it at the time said, yeah, very much so. Let's do this. So we took that in. And then the guy who was in charge at that point, he'd been in charge of the British Cartoon Archive, which you've had at the university since the 70s, and it's newspaper cartoons. He said that he thought that maybe newspaper cartoons wasn't quite as current as it once was, and wouldn't it be great to get a stand-up archive that was a sort of sister archive? And I said, well, that's okay, but comedians can be very protective of their own stuff, and they might not be interested. So I thought I would ask some people I knew whether they would be interested in donating to such an archive. And the two people I asked were Josie Long and Mark Thomas. And they both said yes straight away. And then Warren was being interviewed on the radio about something to do with Linda. And we sort of agreed that we were going to have this stand-up comedy archive, and nothing had been set up yet. And Warren sort of got a little bit ahead of the game and sort of announced that we were starting this archive. I had to sort of let the Vice Chancellor know. So anyway, we started it. And Mark, I remember Mark texting me, I think it was, and saying, "Be careful what you wish for. I'm bringing a ton of stuff for you." So he came with a friend of his, and to help him carry it, they came on the train, and they had a load of amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And then sometime later, Josie gave us some stuff, and then in 2015 we got some money from the university. It was the university's 50th birthday, and there was they were running these things called Beacon projects. So we got a decent amount of money, which meant that we were able to employ somebody to look after this stuff and catalogue it.
Wonderful.
A couple of people actually, and we at that point started properly reaching out to people, and we got really some very, very exciting stuff. So an very old friend of mine who I've mentioned already, Tony Allen, who I think is a real under-recognised person within the history of comedy. I know that he could divide the comedy community even when he was...
Oh, he was brilliant. He was one of the first acts I saw at the Comedy Store.
Amazing. An amazing performer, astonishing performer. And also a really... I know that some people found him difficult. I love Tony. I think he's a really amazing person. Truly amazing history, and I really like him, and I like spending time with him. And Tony gave us some amazing stuff, recordings of alternative cabaret right from the very early on. And then Andy De La Torre gave us some stuff.
Oh, brilliant!
So we had unpublished recordings with like Keith Allen on, and we've got. Tell you what we've got, which is one of the most amazing things in the archive. We've got Alexei Sale performing at the Elgin in Ladbroke Grove in early 1980. And there's a bit that he later did in a slightly altered version in an episode of The Young Ones. And it is even then so soon into his career. It's so funny. It's unbelievable.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And so at the moment, we're not actively looking for stuff, only because we don't have a dedicated archivist for it at the moment. But we do take stuff in every now and then. So I got some stuff from Nigel Planer earlier this year.
Wow.
And I got some more stuff from Alexei, because he's given us some stuff as well. And every time we get stuff, there's always at least one item where my jaw drops,
What I find talking to you is that you're as passionate at this subject as I am. And that's what I hope is developing with my blog and my podcast. I was talking to Nick Helm, and he said, what you've got here without realizing is an archive. Somebody can be actually bothered to write or talk to people about their experiences of watching stand-up comedy. And that's what I like to think it's unique. And it's the same with you, with the archive. It's an amazing collection. Well, it looks amazing online, and your passion is coming through. We're just talking to me, and I so want to meet you.
Well, we will. Some point come over. I'll buy you lunch.
Yeah. Do you think you'll ever go back to performing stand-up comedy full time now, or?
Good God, no.
No.
I mean, the thing about
it took me one go, and I said no. But
well, no, I tell you what it is. I mean, I love doing what I'm doing with Funny Rabbit, the monthly club now.
Yeah.
Because I say monthly, it's actually only 8 shows a year because it doesn't run through the year. But that's, for me, that scratches the itch, because I get in front of an audience that generally, we've got a bit of a kind of regular audience now. So people kind of know who I am. They're sort of tuned into me, which is the ideal circumstances. It means I feel like I've got a handle on the gig, having it started in early 2019. So I've been doing it long enough that I've got a handle on how to play it. I can be playful. I'm not scared about them judging me or being nervous particularly. We've got one on Friday is the next show, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's a I've just taken over as head of School of Arts at Kent, which is taking me away from the teaching, which is very sad. I love teaching.
Yeah.
It's quite a high pressure job, but having a monthly show to kind of take my mind off it and pour my creativity into is just ideal. Coming back at 3 a.m. with heartburn from eating Ginster's cheese and onion pasty, that aspect of things, I don't think I think that's a young man's game, you know.
Well, yeah.
I think if I was famous enough, this would never have happened in any reality, but if I was famous enough and popular enough so that I could do a gig every week and get enough money from that gig to live, and people would come and see me and I didn't have to travel, then maybe, right?
Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Who are your favourite comedians, past and present? Do you have any favourites?
Lots and lots and lots. So if you go back 100 years and more, probably Little Titch would be
brilliant.
My favourite, probably music hall comedian. And then once you get into the variety era, lots really, but Max Miller, I love. I think considered as a comedian, I think Gracie Fields was amazing.
Yeah.
There was an amazing comedian called Suzette Tarry. Frankie Howard was brilliant, I think. When you get into working men's club era stuff, probably, well, you mentioned Tom O'Connor, but Les Dawson you mentioned as well. They were both brilliant, I think.
Yeah.
The folk comedians, obviously Billy Connolly, but also I'm actually a big fan of Jasper Carrott.
So am I.
And then when you get into alternative, I've mentioned a lot of them already, really, but so Alexi is just amazing comedian. Yeah. Tony, I was a huge fan of. I loved Pauline Melville as well. Just
she was brilliant.
Just amazing. Stuart Lee did a thing back in 2011 called At Last the 1981 Show, and she did stand up for the first time in decades and decades. And she was one of the highlights, if not the highlight of the show. I thought she was amazing. And actually, it felt quite dangerous, even in that slightly nostalgic frame. Moving on from them, too many to mention really. I love Josie Long, love Bridget Christie. Obviously, Stuart Lee is just one of the great. Some of the comedians I mentioned are kind of people you'd think of as cool comedians, but I mean, I don't think Sarah Millican is particularly thought of as cool. I just think she's a brilliant comedian. Really underrated.
I first saw her in a tiny hut play about 20 people. And away from the TV, she was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary.
I love her angle. I love her voice. I love her comic voice. Yeah. I love her writing. I love the way she talks to the audience in her shows. I love the way that she gets. The mum has taken her grown-up daughter, and the mum is now talking to Sarah Millican, and she's confessing something amazing that her daughter clearly didn't know. I think there's something magical about that, and I think it's profoundly feminist, but not in a low-faced way, in a delightful, life-enhancing, funny way. Scurrilous, outrageous, knickers down kind of a way. It's
Yeah, she is brilliant. My first ever memory of watching comedy was Morecambe and Wise, and as a family, I've never seen anybody since where everybody of every age range was laughing at them at Christmas. And I never got to see them live. And I was so gutted. I've read everything about them. I've seen the plays. I've met Gary Morecambe. I'm hoping he's going to come on here and talk about his wonderful dad. But one needed the other, and all the analysing of them. They were just an extraordinary thing. But I did see the two Ronnies, Les Dawson, Tommy Cooper, Ken Dodd in the 70s, and then into the 80s. The first bill on the Comedy Store I saw was Linda Smith, Phil Jupitus, Richard Morton, Steve Gribbin, and Charles Fleischer, who went on to voice Roger Rabbit. He was never heard of again because he went to Hollywood. Yeah. But just right the way through the alternative movement, and then into I saw Peter Kay in a tiny club. He was fourth on the bill of 5 comedians, and I laughed so hard at him that I missed the fifth act. And I had to go and apologise to Dave Gorman a few years later because he was the fifth act. And I saw him again. He was great, but it's just wonderful.
So many to mention. I mean, the more you but the more we're talking, the more I'm thinking of Ross Noble, Eddie Izzard,
Yeah.
so many, and we haven't even touched America yet. So
no. One of the highlights for me was Bill Hicks. I saw Bill Hicks in London just before he died. He was extraordinary.
Amazing.
There's a section in my blog called the Ones That Got Away, and I've written about 25 of them. Dave Allen was another one. I almost had a chance to go and see him. Norman Wisdom, Frankie Howard, like you say.
Dave Allen is another favourite. I did see him.
Just amazing, just incredible. Can you please tell me about your book on alternative comedy? How did that come about? Because I've been watching stand-up comedy for nearly 50 years. And how do you think comedy has evolved in this time?
So what happened was I was actually starting to plan a different book project, which I still haven't done and may never do. But when all that stuff was coming into the archive, the thing is, if you know about something, then you know what the significance of something is. So, if you start getting early live recordings of the Leckie Sale or, whatever it is, wait, this is actually gold dust, or, you get, and one of the things we had was a brilliant collection from a venue in London that ran in the 80s and 90s called the Meccano Club.
Yeah.
That was donated by Monica Babinska, who ran it for many years. And it's just brilliant. It's good. Their bookings book is brilliant. It's like, it's all the comedians who were booked from 1988 through to 94, I think it is. And it's handwritten, and you can see how much they were paid, and
wow.
All that kind of stuff. And then it's got phone numbers, including mine, because I used to perform there. and she said, "Oh, you maybe should do a book about this." And then I think it was maybe when we started, maybe I'd got Andy de la Tour's stuff in. I was like, okay, nobody's written an academic book about alternative comedy. Somebody's got to write that book. I've got to write that book. This is the opportunity. Circumstances are telling me what to do. Fate has
That's so good.
Really put its jabbing finger into my forehead and told me to do this. And I just started. Well, I did lots of things. I mean, I started collecting more material because I have my own collection of stuff. I started collecting a few more bits. I started talking to comedians, interviewing people. In some cases, comedians I'd interviewed before, some cases several times, but interviewing them specifically about alternative comedy. And then I started really going through the material, listening to all the digitized recordings, and really looking through the. I mean, I haven't looked at every item in the archive. It's too big. You could have done that, but it's such a big project. So started looking through all of that, making notes, and it was a real labor of love, and I loved working on it. And the only painful bit was I wrote, I think, 35,000 words over the limit that I was supposed to write. And
that's passion. That really is. It's
yeah. I had to cut
it's so good, because once you get cracking on something that you love, it just all flows out, and you're away.
Yeah, definitely. And I think things came out that I hadn't been aware of before. It made me, even though it was a subject I knew quite a lot about, it made me rethink it in many different ways. And I think, what's been nice has been, it's had a really nice review on Chortle, it had a really nice review on Beyond the Joke, Bruce Dessau's blog. And the comedians I know who've read it, I mean, Jim Barclay and Andy de la Tour were really keen on it. They would sort of, and so, yeah, I got to meet people I'd never met before in some cases as well, which was brilliant. I mean, some brilliant experiences. And since then, I mean, I've just come out. There's been a what's called an edited collection, a second volume on alternative comedy, where I've co-written the introduction. I'm also one of the editors. I've written a chapter, and I've written a couple of other bits in it. But then there's chapters written by different people, including one written by Brian Mulligan, who was Steve Gribbin's former partner in Skint Video.
Yeah. So he's Steve Gribbin. He was wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, Steve's such a lovely guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just getting some of this stuff out there has been a real delight. The only thing that really hurts about it is academic publishers now don't try and sell books to normal people. So they price them at institutional level. So my book first came out, I think it was priced £78 hardback. And everybody was going, why is it this expensive? I wish it wasn't. If I had any power at all to make it cheaper, I would do that. Jim Barclay kindly emailed the publisher and said, this needs to be cheaper. Everybody would love this book. And they said, oh, well, it'll come out on paperback. But even as paperback, it's 20 odd quid. And I just wish it was cheaper. I don't understand it.
Well, it is on my Christmas list, my friend. And when I meet you, I'd love for you to sign it. Please.
Oh, yeah, of course. It'd be my great pleasure.
It's so interesting because there are so many wonderful stories. When I was listening to you before, a story came to mind when I first met Harry Hill, who I've loved for the 30, 40 years.
Yeah, another favourite of mine.
He was extraordinary. And I first saw him downstairs at the King's Head, which is a wonderful comedy club in Bridgend. And he was late for the gig. He brushed past me, jumped up onto the stage and said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry I'm late. I had to have a testicle brought down. And he got a laugh. And then he said, from Derby. And I've never forgotten that. And it's just about the best opening line I've ever heard. And when I met him 30 years later, I told him this. And he shook my hand and he said, I still keep telling that routine. but it's like little nuggets like that are so joyous. It's gold, like you say. And I'm so sorry this is the last question I'm going to ask, but what do you think is the future of stand-up comedy? Because every so often you get wonderful comedians and the joy is looking for the originality in the performance, I think, certainly for me, because I've seen so many over the years.
Completely agree. I mean, I think when you see somebody where you go, oh, we're not in Kansas anymore. Like, I love that moment where you just go, this is something I've not seen before.
Yeah.
I love that moment. I don't know. I mean, to slightly backtrack, the thing about how has comedy evolved, I mean, that was a step change, really, that alternative comedy moment. It wasn't that people hadn't done that kind of confessional style of comedian, that sort of lifestyle-based sort of personal testimony thing. Dave Allen had done it a bit. Jasper Carrott, some of those folk comedians have done it, but for it to happen in such a thoroughgoing way, and for that idea of, okay, it's got to be self-written, and also for the political thing as well, that we don't want to do sexist and racist stuff. That was, I mean, we might look back and say that was a bit simplistic now, but that was an important moment, and I think it changed. When people say, where are all the left-wing comedians? Where are all the right-wing comedians? Answer, in the 1970s, because it was very, very rare for a comedian to be left-wing in the 1970s. It wasn't completely unknown, but it's extraordinarily rare. And it sort of, so that was a big shift. I don't think we'll ever get a shift quite like that again. It won't be a big shift because the comedy industry is too established. There wasn't a thing called the comedy industry at that point. What there was working men's clubs. And the variety theatres have gone, and there were comedians who played working men's clubs, and then there was TV and radio comedy, but there wasn't such a thing as the comedy club. It just didn't exist in the UK before the Comedy Store opened in -- The nearest, I suppose, would have been something like the Establishment Club in the early 60s, but that wasn't a comedy club like we would recognise it. It was they had a repertory company, and it was a repertory of satirical sketches. And yes, they would have Lenny Bruce on there for a season, and they would have Frankie Howerd on there for a season, but it still wasn't organised like we would have a comedy club. And so that you can't reinvent that. That's happened now. Every now and then you'll get a wave of something new. So perhaps 15 years ago, you had that wave of, I think it was somebody, Tim Jones in The Guardian referred to them as DIY comedians. So it was Pappy's Fun Club, as was then, and then Josie Long, people like that. And I think that was a moment. But of course, then they have their own thing, and perhaps it changes and evolves and changes into something else. I think the big difference in the comedy scene now from when I was in it is it's more variegated.
Yeah.
Like the people who are your club comics who play, you know, your Friday and Saturday night comedy clubs, you know, with hen parties and blah, blah, blah. And then you have the slightly more alternative people who do that. And then there's a lot of crossover between those. And then you have the little specialist areas, like you have the free speech comedy nights, or you have the more left-wing comedy nights, or you have the black circuit. That's a really important circuit we haven't even touched on yet, which I think is a really amazing area of comedy, and I think doesn't get its due. I mean, somebody like Mo Gilligan is an extraordinary.
Oh, is it amazing?
So happy that he's, you know, made it so big and sort of cast. I think what he did, Black, British and Funny, that documentary was so important to sort of making that point that we've had brilliant British black comedians, but have been ignored really by a lot of TV producers. So I think the change is it's never going to have the seismic revolution that happened in 79, 80, but there'll always be new trends that come in. And I think predicting those is going to be hard. I mean, to take one example of going back to your thing about a comedian who does things in a slightly different way, I think Bridget Christie is a really interesting comedian. I love her work. I think she's super funny in a way that's really distinctive to her.
Totally agree. Yeah.
But even her, like, you couldn't predict, because she started off with those silly costume shows where she dressed up as an ant or, you know, King Charles or whatever, you know, and then it did, you know, a bit for her and did the sort of feminist thing, but very much with the same silliness that she'd used before. And it changed into something different. And I think I just think she's super exciting to watch.
She is so original. You never know what you're going to get next with her, and that's the exciting element, as well as being exceptionally funny.
Yeah, and I think something like Josie is an amazing comedian. And again, it's really evolved over the years. And Stuart Lee, you know, I mean, the thing with Stuart is you go along expecting to be surprised, but he still surprises you in a way you didn't expect.
That's spot on.
I haven't got tickets to see the latest thing that he's running in at the Leicester.
I think he's
on
really
Christmas. Do that, because I try and not ever miss a show that he does.
Oh, I mean, I think he's a genius. I really do.
He's amazing.
I just think he builds. He has a line, and then he can build it up and build it up and build it up. And you're just so in on what he's saying, as well as relating, recognizing. It's extraordinarily funny. He's just wonderful at what he's.
Because it's really intelligent, and it's full of kind of levels of irony. Yeah, but it's really approachable. It's not like its own arse at all. It's
exactly.
Really, anybody could enjoy it, and it's kind of, it's weirdly art house, but at the same time it's proper gut wrenchingly funny. Some of the moments that I've watched where I've been properly helpless with laughter at things that he's done, like the thing in the 41st Best Comedian tour where he was talking about how the British public's favourite thing ever is Del Boy falling through a bar. And he's lying on his side with the back to the audience in a low energy, pissed off way, describing the British public. You think this is the funniest thing ever. Del Boy falling through a bar, and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to the point where you're just watching it and you just don't know why it's funny anymore. You're just laughing and crying and helpless with laughter. Just amazing. Amazing.
Are you as bad as me, going to comedy every night, or do you go to a lot of comedy? Because your knowledge of it is extraordinary.
I go as much as I can, and how it tends to pattern is I definitely don't go every night. I probably don't go every week because it depends what's there. Yeah. But what I often do is, so like in a couple of weeks, I think I've got maybe 3 or 4 in a week, and that's how it works. And I mean, one of the things I love about doing Funny Rabbit is seeing comedians that I haven't seen before. You know, so the first time I saw Beck Hill live was at Funny Rabbit, and she was so brilliant.
The drawing, it was superb.
Superb, and what a lovely person as well.
Yeah.
And so that's always great, when a comedian comes on to do that I've not seen before or heard of, that kind of keeps you in touch with who's out there. And I'm just starting to get properly back into it post lockdown. I did see quite a lot of lockdown shows, but
did you do a lot of online gigs? Did you watch?
I did a few, yeah. I mean, we did for Funny Rabbit. We did 4 different formats from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of the last lockdown. So the first one we did was straight to Facebook Live, but no live audience in there. That was really weird. Then the next ones we did, I think we did a couple of socially distanced but in real life gigs. Then we did ones where we filmed it in the theatre with no audience and then put that out as a stream later on. Very weird. Seeing Glenn Wool doing his high energy routines to nobody. And I could hear his voice, his powerful voice echoing down the corridors. It was like art, really. And then the final one we did was just a Zoom one with the audience in there in the Zoom with you. And that or the socially distanced ones are my favourites. But I wouldn't swap either of those for a proper gig.
No. When they were done well, they were done really well. But when they first started, there was no audio. It was all on Zoom. There was no audio. So I was sitting here laughing at 4 walls really loudly, and I thought I was going to be taken away. But once they put the audio on, that you could see the comedians who were very good at doing it online, catching the beat of the joke, chatting to the audience. They were effortless, and it got really good. So I would go to Happy Mondays with Sean James. I'd go to Worsby Comedy. I'd go to the Irishman Abroad with Jarlath Regan. And it was wonderful, I mean, it was such a horrible time, obviously, to live through, because we all had to stay in, and there was still a rapport. But I'm exactly with you. I just love the experience of seeing something live, because you're in the moment, you're ready to be to just sit and as I said at the start of the interview, what is not to love? It's such a specialist medium. This has been an absolute joy. You've been a wonderful guest. I'm so looking forward to meeting you very soon. I wish you every success with whatever you do, because you're a very intelligent, funny, wonderful comedian. You've made me laugh. Your stories are wonderful. Your teaching is fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you. Like I said at the beginning, thanks for inviting me. I any excuse to talk, Rich. I mean, it's
I'm the same.
I love it, and I love talking about comedy. It's a real what it is. It's like people, when comedy works well, it looks like it's just natural, like breathing. Yeah. Well, there's so much skill and craft involved in it, and art as well. Artistry, and I think, like, taking something and not seeing it for granted, but seeing it in all those different dimensions, but still loving it, still enjoying it on that visceral level.
That's the magic of it. We try to break it down in, you're looking for originality. When I go and see comedians, there are pun comedians, there are people with a point, there are storytellers, there are idiots. It's all sorts of wonderful things that we positively love in life, and life is so difficult. So as I say, what is not to love? It's life can be so difficult. It's helped me enormously, having the interest and the passion for it, and I can clearly see with you as well. Thank you so much for your time. As I say, I'm looking forward to seeing you soon, and all the best with whatever you do. Thank you for being a great guest. Thank you.
Thank you.